Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so very much for being here and the attention that you are focusing on what is an extremely important case. My name is Jax Corolla. Together with Darrell Lewis and Pat Quinlan, my law partners, we shared responsibility for representing Yvette Simmons. Yvette is the court-appointed guardian for Dontrell Stephens, and of course, the privilege of representing a young man whose courage and fortitude and strength of character I have come over the course of the last 2.5 years to admire greatly. Dontrell Stephens. You are here far less to hear me speak than to hear Dontrell speak. And I want to begin this program by giving Dontrell an opportunity to answer some questions that you may have. There is no better spokesperson for the cause of Dontrell Stephens than Dontrell Stephens. So I'm going to start, before we do any further introductions, and we have some important people here whom I do want you to meet. Before we do any further introductions and before I make any further comments, I want to open the floor to questions that I know you have all been waiting 2.5 years to ask the victim of this terrible tragedy. So if you would, we'll entertain questions right now. And if you don't have any, I'd be happy to start for you.
Sure.
Yes?
I'll start off by saying, while it seems that the jury, the $23.1 million, you awarded, but it seems like it's something that's going to be tied up for quite a while. How do you feel about that? This seems like you may not even, there's a possibility you may not even see this money anytime soon.
How do I feel? Well, right now, I just pretty much leave everything in God's hand. I'm feeling all right, but I mean, it takes time for things. It takes a lot of time for things to happen. So it's not like I feel okay about what's going on right now and everything, but it takes time for things to happen. But I just leave everything in God's hand.
What was your reaction after you heard that the jury had said that the deputy used excessive force and that they felt that you were entitled to $23 million? What was remember what your reaction was last week?
Well, when I found out that verdict, my reactions, I was pretty much like, I wasn't happy, or I was like, I'm glad that the jury got to hear my testimony out and know that I was telling the truth. I'm glad about that. But I mean, it was kind of an emotional feeling at that time.
So mostly just glad that they recognized that you had been wrong? Is that what you're saying?
That I had been wrong? No, that I had been right, that you meant to say?
Yeah, that you were right and the deputy was wrong in using and shooting.
Yes, I was very proud of the jury being able to hear my testimony and be able to know that I had spoken the truth.
What are your feelings now for Deputy Lynn? What did it feel like, first of all, seeing him for the first time since the shooting, and what are your feelings for him now?
Well, my first time seeing him after the shooting, I mean, you have to forgive people. You can't just hold a grudge against someone just because of what they did. I didn't have no feeling, but I would like an apology. That's what I would like, but I mean, I forgive him for what he did, did, even though he was in the wrong.
Dontrell, what do you think the verdict, what kind of message do you think the verdict sends to law enforcement in general?
Can you like explain to me, like?
Sure. Do you think that the fact that this jury came back awarding $23 million in your case against the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, do you think that this sends a message to other police officers and cops around the country?
Right, it does.
Yeah.
Yes, it does, because it sends a message out to other police that does the right thing, and that's not just using excessive force without using excessive force without being able, like, if somebody's in the wrong, like using excessive force with somebody that's in the wrong, but somebody that's not in the wrong, yeah, I think this message would be a lot more helpful.
Let me add a few comments on Dontrell's behalf, if I could. It is often repeated that justice delayed is justice denied. Dontrell received a promise of justice last week from a federal judge and an 8-person federal jury. And it's an extremely important promise, but it is only at this point a promise of justice. And there is a long road that remains to be traveled, and it will be a difficult road for Dontrell to travel under the present circumstances. There is a very real danger that the life sentence Dontrell Stephens received for no other offense, if he committed any offense at all, and there's serious doubt as to whether he committed any offense at all, the offense of impeding the flow of traffic when he caused, allegedly, a truck to slow down to 15 miles per hour to allow him to cross the street in front of the truck driver. The sentence Dontrell received was a life sentence, imprisoned in that wheelchair. And it is a terrible injustice that he has received that sentence, and an injustice that cannot be undone and can't be compensated for with money. But it is a terrible injustice as well. That Dontrell's life sentence of imprisonment in a wheelchair stands a very real chance of being converted to a death sentence if he does not receive the care that we as a society are obliged to provide to him. Very shortly following the conclusion of the trial last week, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office issued a press release. And in that press release, they described the verdict rendered by the jury as disturbing and unjust. The sheriff of Palm Beach County spoke to a group of Dade County police officers back just a couple of months ago. And he told that group that if you don't shoot at us, if you don't try to stab us, if you don't try to run your car into us, then you won't have any problems from us. And we owe you no apologies if you do any of those things. Dontrell Stephens didn't try to shoot anyone. He didn't try to stab anyone. He didn't run his car into anyone. Indeed, as acknowledged during the course of this trial, within less than 2 seconds after the blue lights and siren alerted Dontrell Stephens to the fact that he was being stopped by a police officer, he pulled his bicycle off the side of the road and brought his brakeless bicycle to a stop, put it on the ground, and walked to meet the police officer who, according to the police officer, ordered him to come to him. Dontrell Stephens followed that order. According to the police officer, he told Dontrell Stephens to stop, and 10 feet away from that police officer, the police officer acknowledged Dontrell Stephens stopped. According to the police officer, Dontrell was told to raise his hands, and Dontrell Stephens began to raise his hands. He followed every order that he was given. He complied with the direction of that police officer, and 2 seconds after Dontrell Stephens walks out of the view of the dash camera that recorded this entire transaction, except for those 2 seconds, within 2 seconds, shots began to ring out, and Dontrell Stephens winds up on the ground, having been shot 4 times with 3 bullets remaining in his body, the last of those shots entering his back and severing his spinal cord. And that bullet still remains right there in Dontrell Stephens' spine. He has another bullet wound in his right arm, the inside just above his elbow. And that bullet remains lodged in the outside of that arm. There is absolutely no way that that bullet could have entered Dontrell's arm in the position in which it did and have remained lodged in the position in which it is unless Dontrell Stephens' arm was raised, as Dontrell Stephens has sworn under oath it was raised, above his head with a cell phone clearly visible in his right hand. Dontrell Stephens was shot with his arms raised above his head and a clearly visible cell phone in his arm. The same cell phone that's clearly visible on the dash camera recording as Dontrell Stephens is riding down the street in front of the police officer before those blue lights are turned on and before the siren is chirped. The same cell phone that Dontrell Stephens is seen holding in his right hand as he gets off the bicycle. The same cell phone that remains in his right hand as he walks out of the dash cam picture. And the same cell phone that Dontrell Stephens is holding in his right hand as he falls against the wall and onto the ground 2 seconds later. That dash cam video, together with the physical evidence of the location of Dontrell's wounds, clearly and unequivocally establishes that this was an excessive use of force in violation of Dontrell Stephens' constitutional rights. There can be no doubt about that. The federal jury, in less than 3.5 hours, came to that conclusion unanimously. And these were a group of intelligent, committed individuals who paid extremely close attention to every word that was spoken, every picture that was shown, every aspect of the evidence presented in this case. There can be no doubt that Dontrell Stephens did nothing wrong, and yet at the hands of a Palm Beach County deputy sheriff remains sentenced to life in a wheelchair and facing the potential of a death sentence if he doesn't get the care he needs. Florida law restricts recovery on the claims that were tried before that jury. As far as the sheriff's office is concerned, to $200,000 what is called the sovereign immunity limit, $200,000. That's about $1.8 million less than the medical expenses Dontrell Stephens already accumulated. It does nothing to address the very conservative present dollar cost of Dontrell's future care, which according to the unrebutted testimony presented at trial will be $5 million. If a citizen presents a threat of great bodily harm to a law enforcement officer, make no mistake about it, that law enforcement officer is absolutely entitled to defend his life and limb with force and deadly force if necessary. And we don't question that right. We must support the law enforcement officers in our community who have a very difficult job to perform. But we do good law enforcement officers no favor at all if we turn a blind eye to the reckless disregard of the rights of any citizen, the way in which a blind eye has been turned to the reckless disregard of Dontrell Stephens' rights. No apology is owed if reckless conduct on the part of a citizen, threat with a gun, threat with a knife, trying to drive a car into a law enforcement officer, results in that citizen's death or great bodily harm. But the sheriff of Palm Beach County and the deputy sheriff individually responsible for the actions that result in Dontrell Stephens being here as he is today, they owe an apology to Dontrell. They owe respect to the federal jury who returned the verdict on Dontrell's behalf. They need to live up to their obligations. We as a community have a debt that we owe to Dontrell Stephens that needs to be recognized. And it needs to be recognized not sometime in the distant future. It needs to be recognized while it can still make a difference in Dontrell's life and can still stand a chance of preserving that life. There needs to be respect on both sides of the badge, if a badge is to remain a symbol of respect. And if we as a community lose respect for law enforcement officers, that makes the job of good police officers not only more difficult, but virtually impossible. We have an obligation to Dontrell Stephens. We have an obligation to good police officers to make sure that Dontrell is treated properly, is shown respect, is given the apology that he deserves, and is provided with justice while justice can still make a difference in his life.